Medication for ulcerative colitis. In this video, we're going to learn about two specific drugs, Tremfya or Skyrizi and Rinvoq. We're going to learn about their categories and exactly how they work inside of your cells. So let's get right into it. Now, because we already talked about this inflammatory cascade of ulcerative colitis in our previous video, where we talked about different types of medications for ulcerative colitis, we will not get into too much detail. However, we're going to take a look at this initial part of the inflammatory process, and we're going to continue from there. What happens is when this bacteria gets in contact with these macrophages or the white blood cells, they do two different things. First of all, they break this bacteria down into little pieces, and they present these little pieces to other different cells called naive T cells. And at the same time, they also release different types of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Some of them go and activate these naive T cells and convert them into Th cells or T helper cells. And the one specific cytokine that we're going to pay attention to or we're going to look into is interleukin 23. This is a pro-inflammatory cytokine. Think of this cytokine as this little plug with these two pins poking out of it. The first pin is P19 and the other one is P40 subunit. Now, what this plug does is it has a receptor site on these Th cells. What it does is it comes down and binds with this receptor. And it converts these Th cells into different types of inflammatory cells called Th17 cells. And these cells are very problematic. Why? Because they start to release different types of cytokines called interleukin 17. Now, these are different types. And TNF alpha. More specifically, the TNF alpha, they go down to your blood vessels and start to pull different types of white blood cells like neutrophils and monocytes or macrophages into the area of your intestinal tissue. Once these neutrophils and macrophages out in this vicinity or into your intestinal tissue, they start to release different types of reactive oxygen species and proteolytic enzymes. And we talked about this in great detail in our previous video as well. If you guys want to check that out, it will help you understand this process a little bit better. And both of these things, they start to damage not only the actual bacteria, they also tend to damage the intestinal tissue, which is why you start to form different types of ulcers in your intestine or your colon. And this is the normal process of how interleukin 23 is responsible for this inflammatory cascade. Now, what if we have a drug called Tremfya or Skyrizi? These are essentially the interleukin 23 inhibitors. They look like a little cap. Think of it as a little cap. Now, what if you put this cap onto P19 subunit or one of these pins? Are you going to be able to bind this plug into the receptor? No. And if you don't bind this receptor into this Th17 cells receptor or Th cells receptor, are you going to be able to convert this cell into Th17 cell? No. If you don't convert this Th17 cell, are you going to be able to make interleukin 17 and all these different types of inflammatory cytokines? No. And the overall effect is you're not going to be able to pull these white cells into the area and you shut down the inflammatory cascade. And that's exactly how Tremfya and Skyrizi work, and they are also known as interleukin 23 inhibitors. The second drug is Rinvoq, or also known as JAK inhibitors. You know how we talked about in the previous video how you have these Th2 cells and they release different types of cytokines which go on and then convert B cells into plasma cells, and these plasma cells are the ones that release different types of antibodies which basically promote more inflammatory processes inside your colon or your intestine. What we're going to do is we're going to take this B cell and we're going to zoom into it and we're going to open its cell membrane. And we're going to look at the key components that are embedded into its cell membrane to be able to better understand how this drug actually works. Okay? Now, if you take a look at this little receptor that's embedded into the actual membrane of your B cell, it has two different tails. And both of these tails, they kind of sit away from each other normally. But what happens is when you have these little enzyme or the cytokines released by different Th2 cells, they come down and they bind with this receptor. And what happens is both of these tails, they come close to each other. And what's the other thing that you have attached to these tails? You have these two different enzymes called JAK1 and JAK3. And they have little pockets where another different types of molecule called ATP or adenosine triphosphate, it comes and bind into these pockets on the both side, on both of the enzymes. Now, what both of these enzymes do is, first of all, JAK1 takes one of the phosphate from adenosine triphosphate and puts that phosphate onto JAK3. And JAK3 takes another phosphate from this side of the ATP and puts it onto JAK1. And as a result, they get activated. Both of these enzymes are now active, and they repeat the same process one more time. They take another molecule or another phosphate from another ATP molecule, and they put that phosphate onto the tail of this receptor on both sides. Now, phosphates are negatively charged ions. Because they're negatively charged ions, they like to attract anything that's positive around them. In this case, we have another protein called, or two different proteins called STAT. These are signaling proteins. They have positive charge to them. What they do is they basically go on bind into or to this receptor because of the phosphates, and they get active. Once both of these receptors or the proteins are active, they kind of couple together and they make this dimer, another different type of signaling protein. What happens is basically they come down to the actual nucleus of your cell where you hold all the genetic information. And they stimulate or tell the nucleus to make different types of proteins or maybe different types of cells in this case. So what happens is the nucleus start to make more inflammatory cells called plasma cells. And once you have these plasma cells, these are the problematic cells. What they do is they basically produce a whole bunch of antibodies called p-ANCA antibodies. And these are the antibodies that promote this inflammatory cascade in people with ulcerative colitis. We've already talked about this in the previous video. If you guys really want to learn that entire cascade, you can go check that video out. The name of the video is Medications for Ulcerative Colitis, where we covered different types of medications and the immune response and how exactly those medications work there. Anyways, now this is the normal process of how these cytokines basically lead to the production of plasma cells and the antibodies that cause lots and lots of problems. Now, what if we have a drug called Rinvoq that comes, and we use this drug, and what it does is basically comes in and binds with the pocket of, or the active site of, JAK1 enzyme, and it blocks this pocket. Now, if you block this pocket, are you going to be able to take this ATP into the pocket and use its phosphate to activate the tails of the receptor or even the other JAK3 enzyme? No. And as a result, you're not going to be able to put the phosphates onto the tails of this receptor, and you won't be able to attract these STAT proteins towards the tail of this receptor. So basically, you're cutting off the signal to the actual nucleus to be able to produce these plasma cells. And if you don't have the plasma cells, are you going to be able to make these p-ANCA antibodies? No. And the overall effect is you basically reduce the amount of inflammation. Now, that's exactly how this drug works in people with ulcerative colitis. These drugs are used for different autoimmune diseases as well, but we're going to stick to the actual ulcerative colitis. Now, I really hope this entire video made sense. If it did, please give us a like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to make these beautiful, amazing educational videos in the future. Thank you.